You're watching HFO-TV, your partner in Pacific Northwest multifamily investing. HFO-TV is brought to you by Pacific Exteriors Northwest, apartment siding contractors with nearly 30 years of experience, providing exceptional quality and service to multifamily and residential owners. And by Gantry Incorporated, the nation's largest independent mortgage banking firm.
Welcome back to HFO-TV. I'm Greg Frick, partner at HFO Investment Real Estate. And today we have back with us Zach Lindahl. He's Director of Government Affairs with Multifamily Northwest, an organization that we've had here multiple times talking. But now it's kind of great to have somebody that's dedicated towards the legislative side of our industry in Oregon specifically, and a little bit in Washington. But again, Zach, thanks for coming back. I thought it would be good for our audience to hear kind of what's on the agenda as we get into the next legislation session, and kind of what are you checking off, and what's going to be first quarter, second quarter of 25 is what we're looking at. So thank you for taking time to come back.
Absolutely. Thank you, Greg, and thanks for having me back. In our previous discussion, we talked about how I interface with our members on the Government and Public Affairs Committee to help decide what our legislative priority list is for session and the biennium that is to come, which is 2025, 2026. And really, we have 5 or 6 key pillars that we're going to be focusing in on next legislative session. And those are going to be maintaining affordability and supporting daily operations, as well as supporting additional resources for renters. We're going to also look at promoting and preserving all forms of housing development, long-term financing for housing, as well as preventing patchwork legislation at the local level. We do expect to see more bill ideas and concepts come out, and we'll formalize that and put that into our legislative priorities as we move forward. But for right now, we're solely focusing on those pillars and adjusting from there.
It's interesting. It was this last legislative session. There was such a large number of new legislators in, and there was a lot of stuff thrown against the wall. How do you kind of judge sometimes, it's worth going, that's going to get traction, that one's not? I'm sure with your experience, you've been doing this for a long time. I mean, that's because I'll get a call from an owner sometimes. Hey, I heard somebody threw this thing on. Do you think it's going to go? And I'm like, well, let me see if it's got any, legs. I mean, how do you kind of judge which ones to go after? Or not, maybe go after is not the right word, but, to deal with?
Well, I mean, that's a great question and a great point you're making. Multifamily Northwest is dedicated to building relationships with all electeds at all levels of government. And so really, during the interim, which we're in right now, obviously the summer season, we are meeting with legislators, both in the housing committees, but also across the entire state. I'm actually heading to a campaign event out in Bend tomorrow to keep building those key relationships.
Oh, good. Okay.
And so what comes of these meetings is just building these relationships. So we learn about new bill ideas and concepts. And what's really great is we want to be the resource for elected officials. And as they ask us questions and we try to figure out what problems they're trying to solve, we're able to provide the crucial feedback that they need in order to make a policy decision. And as those kind of get momentum, we connect with other elected officials, we connect with our team to really get more insight whether or not it actually has legs, as we like to say, or whether or not it's just a idea being floated around. But we check in frequently with our chairs of the housing committees, both at the Senate and housing levels, and connecting with the leaders of both the House and Senate caucus for both the Republicans and the Democrats, just to see the appetite for the different bill concepts.
And are you getting better reception coming in? Because I know, again, we kind of got heavily involved in the fight of, the rent control back in 16, 17. It was really hard to get to the table. Are you finding it more receptive that, hey, there's an understanding that they've got to get different viewpoints in crafting legislation?
Yes, absolutely. Through our meetings that my team of 3 and I have had, we've heard from folks on both sides of the aisle that they have pushed housing providers too far and that they're looking to bring it back to the center, which is really a good sign. So we're feeling relatively optimistic for next legislative session.
Now, are there any, I know that affordability always the one that comes up is always, and, are there any, do you anticipate, legislation regarding that, or what are you hearing in your meetings?
Yeah, so we're anticipating a slate of all kinds of different legislation. I know some of the standard ones we always hear about are, rental registries and rent caps and stuff like that. But, we also hear about items that are a little bit more unique that when you hear the concept, you might not think about affordability, and it's more affecting our supplier members. But all kinds of different legislation affects affordability, both for not only for our members, but also for the renters. And that's something that myself and our team are taking upon to educate elected officials across the board about how these different policies will affect not only us but the renters.
So in this kind of downtime so it's really educating legislators and lawmakers in terms of how these so-called plans or ideas will downstream effect from the end user being the renter to the housing provider, and do they fully understand? Because I think there has been a misconception as to what it means to be a rental housing provider and what the effects can be on some of the legislation that gets put through.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's exactly what we're doing right now.
Good.
Most recently, we launched our legislative survey, I believe, in the early parts of June. And what we really honed in on was 6 or 7 different topics that we thought would come to the legislature, whether that's affordability, whether it is insurance, or we had questions about property, crime, and eviction. And we're taking the information that our members provide, because we are a member-driven organization,
right,
and we're putting together a informal booklet that we could provide not only the housing committees but all elected officials to continue that education, because they know I shouldn't say it like that, but they their knowledge of the housing market and the housing industry is really only given to them by the work inside district. And so being the experts that we are in the housing market or in the housing space, we are trying to be upfront with them and show them what the data says from our members.
Well, I think, it's been clear based on some of the legislation that's gone through. There's not an understanding on the management side. Mm-hmm. As we've got a lot of, owners, but then also on there's not an understanding in Salem and Olympia, and even I would even see in DC, what it means to manage multifamily and what it, as a rental housing provider and a management company, you put all these policies in and think that's great, but, how is it actually going to be working? What's the nuance of that? And doesn't seem, I'm hoping that with what's happened before, there's an understanding and we're getting in front of this group and kind of educating them like, hey, if you put this in, this is what it's going to look like. Is that really the intention you're looking for?
I think that's a great point, and this is exactly why we launched the legislative survey. We went up front, and let's take right now there's an issue happening in the city of Portland through the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability,
right,
and it's the energy reporting requirements, which I'm sure you and some of your clients have seen.
Well, they've heard about it. They haven't seen the details, and we talked about it and said, hey, this is brewing. It's not set in stone, but be aware you're going to hear things. How are we going to address this?
Exactly, and we've been working with the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, and when we had initial discussions with them, it was clear that there was some potential, questions still up in the air. And so we went back and we talked to our members. If this policy was to go into effect, how would it affect you and just your day-to-day operations?
Right.
Would there be a financial cost? Would you have to reallocate your resources? A employee on site to handle this? How would this work? And we use that information to go back to a group like the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability and say, hey, maybe this policy will have unintended consequences that you maybe didn't consider up front. And so that's how we go about things. And we are a collaborative organization, and we want to work with all groups to make sure that all ideas are flushed out.
And I'm assuming if you can get there early and have some discussion as they're crafting, as opposed to just always opposing, there's some more collaboration, and they'll start looking, at our organization as to, hey, before we craft some, landlord tenant law stuff, let's talk about what that's going to look like.
Yeah, you're right. We are a collaborative organization, and we go in with the mindset of what is the problem you're trying to solve, and how can we be a help to finding the solution. And so, referencing back to BPS, the energy reporting requirements, we'll continue to advocate on issues like that and others to put up possibly better solutions that will have less consequences across the board. Okay,
no, that's good. Well, I'm glad you're in front of this, because again, I think we've had a tendency to be very reactionary, especially on the legislative side. So being able to get in front of that, hopefully, and then again, just having somebody dedicated towards this team and working with the lobbyists, and as I've said to multiple people, our audience, is, hey, if we may need you down in Salem. We can't have the same voices always talking about housing. It'd be great to get rental providers and managers actually down there telling real life stories. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one thing I touched upon during our first video, which was I engage our members in grassroots activities. And, you have myself and my 2 colleagues, Johnny and Molly. Johnny's in-house with me at Multifamily Northwest, and Molly is our contract lobbyist full-time in Salem. But they hear the elected officials hear from the 3 of us very frequently. And sometimes it seems like, you just can't get through. What we need from our members and from folks that are looking at an organization like Multifamily Northwest is to realize that you have to come to the table and you have to tell your story. Without your stories and without your direct advocacy to your elected officials, sometimes it falls short. And the more folks that show up and offer their testimony and their stories, the more likely we are to hit to really prove a point and talk about the true realities of what we're seeing as housing providers, not only in the city of Portland, but across the state of Oregon.
And I think one thing I think is unique now is I think the sentiment has changed a little bit, that in terms of, who they're listening to. Again, we don't always want to deal with what happened in the past, but I understand, especially in the city of Portland, it was very tenant heavy. Tenant advocacy groups, the loudest group was kind of getting a lot of the attention. I think there's an understanding now politically you can't listen to the extremes. We've got to get more of the middle. And I guess I'm saying this to our audience, is if you get a letter from me or a call for action from me or Zach asking for stories or things like that, because again, Multifamily Northwest, a lot of the members are management companies, and a lot of the people watching this are clients of the management company. We sometimes need you to come down, as constituents of various legislative groups. So, if we get a call with something going on in Bend and you live in Bend, don't be surprised if you get a letter or a call saying, hey, even if it's something written or something, it just is a lot more powerful than the same voices going again and again.
Absolutely. And I'd like to add into, we have launched what we call the Ambassador Program within our Government and Public Affairs Committee. And the Ambassador Program is setting our members up for success with their elected officials.
Okay.
And so we have assigned folks their ambassador roster, which what we did is we took the Senate district in which they either live or they operate a business in, and we're connecting them with their legislators directly. And the idea is, on their own time, they're building those relationships, and they're going to be the ones to hand off that booklet and show them our policy issues and explain why certain policy ideas are both good or bad. And that will go a long way with building relationships and advocating on behalf of our policy issues.
So if we have any audience members that want to take a part of that, please reach out to myself. We'll have Zach's contact information as well. I think more the better. And again, I think direct ownership advocating, I think, would be very beneficial. So again, if anybody has questions, feel reach out to our office. We can get you Zach's contact. But I think it's vital for a lot of this stuff not to just lean on the management companies. We need to get property owners involved, especially in districts that they live in. Mm-hmm. And if they've got direct relationships with their elected officials, let's try to leverage that for the good of the industry.
Absolutely.
So, well, thanks for taking the time to do this. I think it was very beneficial. And again, if you want to get information, you can get it the email down below. And again, if we reach out, there's a reason why. I think this is again more of a less reactionary, kind of strategy, which I think was going to, bode well for us as an industry. So again, thanks for taking the time for doing this, and I'm really glad you're out there advocating for rental housing providers.
Absolutely. Thank you, Greg, and thanks to the HFO team for having me here today.
And we'll see you next time on HFO-TV. Thank you.
Our entire office specializes in multifamily real estate, making HFO the largest multifamily brokerage in the Pacific Northwest. Your success is our passion. Build your legacy with HFO. Call 503-241-5541 or visit our website at hfore.com for more information.